Bill, thanks for joining us on Liberty and Finance.
Thanks for having me back, Dunnigan.
Our viewers look to you for your seasoned experience at studying the metals markets and having your finger to the pulse of what's going on in the bullion market. You've been involved in some of the biggest retail deals in the bullion space in recent years, and you have contacts in the industry, et cetera, as well as keeping tabs on the news flow and what's not making the news but is just below the surface that people need to understand. You've talked to us for years about a coming monetary reset, and there seem to be shifting tectonic plates right now that we wanted to get you to weigh in on. Two things in particular we want to make sure that we cover today. One is the enormous flows of metals from the London Bullion Exchange to the COMEX, ostensibly ahead of Trump tariffs or whatever, but is that just a cover story, et cetera? Because we have seen, even on the COMEX side, extreme difficulty getting silver COMEX bars off the exchange, which is absolutely unusual in our experience. Secondly, we want to talk about the story that came out over the weekend from the Trump Oval Office. We have Scott Bessent saying we're going to monetize the asset side of the U.S. balance sheet. To a casual observer, that could be interpreted as being a major step in the direction of a monetary reset that you've warned us about for years. So if we could first start with the physical flow of metals from London to New York and the shortage. We've heard delivery shortages changing from days to up to 4 to 8 weeks off the exchanges. Can you bring us up to date on what we know about what's really going on with the gold and silver moving between the major exchanges in the world and the shortages, the inability to deliver promptly?
Yeah, there's been a huge influx of metal moving from London to COMEX. You can look at the amount of contracts standing for delivery for February for gold. Those are definitely outsized. Even January was outsized. January was if you want to call it a non-delivery month, it was not one of the major months, yet there was a huge amount of gold. I think it was close to 3 million ounces, 2.9 million ounces in January. So one school of thought is this gold is moving from London to New York to meet anticipated deliveries. Same thing with silver. Silver's the following month out. It's March. So if we get through January, then if we get through February, then we've got March for silver. So in the next 45 to 60 days are going to be nail biters for the shorts, just simply because if they don't have enough metal, then you get a failure to deliver, and a failure to deliver it really blows the exchange up. Because in the words of my late partner, Jim Sinclair, what's the value of a contract they cannot perform? If they can't deliver, then what's it worth? It's worth zero. That's one school of thought on the metal moving from London to COMEX. Another school of thought, if you look all over the world, nations have been repatriating their gold over the last, really over the last 2 years. Nations have repatriated their gold out of New York, out of London, and brought that gold home to their own territory. And I think that is a function of what was done to Russia back in October, November of 2023, when the 300 billion of treasury reserves were basically absconded with. Nation after nation is looking at that, and they're saying, well, if they can do it to Russia, then they could do it to anyone. And I think that's a function of nations not wanting to be, if you want to call it, canceled. That they want to make sure that their monetary reserves don't get canceled. And, gold is the obvious choice, because if you hold it in your possession, it can't be canceled, it cannot bankrupt, it can never become a black hole on a central bank's balance sheet. It's always going to have value, and we can get into this later in the discussion, but what you're viewing here, in my opinion, this is the the Great Reset. Now, you call it monetary reset. I'm going to call it the everything reset, and we can talk about that in a little bit.
Yes, I would like to get into that right now if we could, because when you talked about gold repatriation by different countries, it seems that it was often countries that had stored their gold in London or in the U.S. saying we want our gold back. It started with Germany, we had Poland, we had Cyprus, we had all these different countries saying, give us our gold. And there were interesting delays proposed by the so-called holders of that gold. If we should first touch on that before we get on, why has it been so? The motivation, I think, is you made clear. It's all these sanctions, et cetera, weaponization of financial assets by the U.S. and by the West, drawing the understandable reaction from countries saying, fine, if you're going to weaponize the dollar, weaponize the SWIFT system, weaponize our own assets that are on storage with you against us, then forget it. Game's off. We want our stuff back, and we want it back now. Why would that result in metal flowing from London to the U.S., though? That's one thing that's not obvious to a casual observer in that.
If you view this entire thing, first off, going back to Germany was the first one really to repatriate anything of size. They asked for 300 tons of gold. They were told, oh, it's going to take at least 2 to 3 years to do because of the logistics, blah, blah, blah. It was all bullshit. I mean, if they could not do 300 tons in 2 or 3 years, then how can they do 400 tons now in what, 10 days, 2 weeks time? So that clearly shows that they were lying back then. It's my guess that certainly there's some credence to these COMEX contracts have to be delivered, because if they're not delivered on, then they go to zero and the confidence in futures will collapse. Looking at it from the standpoint of a global reset, this could just be onshoring gold to the United States, because the United States understands there's a reset. And the old saying, he who has the gold makes the rules, you want as much gold on hand as you possibly can. Now, this 400 plus tons is chump change compared to what has been accumulated by central banks over the last 3 to 5 years, and really chump change if you compare it to what China has sourced over the last 10 to 15 years. It was really back in, I think it was 2011 or 12, when China began leaking some of their treasuries and unloading gold. I mean, if I remember 6-7 years ago saying, and I mean, it was easily done, on the back of a napkin, I could show you by 2017-18 that China already had 25,000 metric tons. So that number, in my estimation, is probably 35,000 metric tons compared to the supposed 8,300 tons that the U.S. has, which I don't believe they have. So our gold reserves have been dwarfed by China. Now, getting into the reset aspect of it, I think the last 3 weeks, and 3 weeks ago was the inauguration for Trump, the last 3 weeks, if you cannot see that this is a complete reset, upheaval of the status quo, business as usual, then you're not paying attention, because everything is changing. I mean, just look at the executive orders, and I'm not happy with all the executive orders, and we can get into that if you want or not. But the executive orders are upending the status quo. The way America had been run for the previous 50 years is already changed, and it's going to continue to change. So you've got social issues, you've got financial issues, you have monetary issues. The entire system is in the process of resetting. And I would think that within, 90 to 180 days, you're going to look back to where we were just 3 weeks ago, under the previous administration and the previous, if you want to call it world order, you're not going to recognize in 3 to 6 months where we are compared to where we were.